Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, his church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and today we're talking about something that has become so significant for so many of us over this last year. But for the people's lives being affected, this has been going on for many, many years, and it's the refugee crisis that's taking place in the Middle East. And so you'd have to be hiding under a rock not to be aware of the significant displacement that's happening in the Middle East. Nearly 12 million people have been displaced from the crisis taking place there. But many people in America, at least, aren't always sure how to engage this. They see it as sometimes a political issue that's being batted around in the headlines about whether America should receive refugees. They're not always sure whether all of these refugees are Christians or Muslims. And so there's so much missing from the conversation that over this 9-minute conversation, it's going to catch you up rather quickly on what is taking place and what does it look like on the ground from people who have been there on the ground, including one of our guests, Jeremy Courtney. Jeremy Courtney is the CEO of Preemptive Love Coalition, and he moved his family to Iraq several years back after the Iraq War was coming to its conclusion. His family went there to begin doing heart-saving surgeries for children because he knew he needed to show up and become a peacemaker the way he read in his Bible that he was to be. But in the midst of that, as this refugee crisis began and as you started to see the rise of ISIS and so much displacement happening in the area, they started to turn their attention to how do they care for and love the people who are being affected by this in a dramatic way. And so joining him in this conversation with me is Noel Yeatts. Now, Noel is somebody who's the vice president of World Help, which is an international Christian humanitarian organization that works in all kinds of impoverished communities, but have been involved for well over a decade in the Middle East as well. And so you're hearing from two veteran voices who have really experienced firsthand what it's like for people and children and families and mothers and fathers to be displaced and removed entirely from their homes and now are looking for support, and they have real needs. And we're going to hear about some of those needs and hear about how people are engaging them in really creative and loving ways. What an opportunity for us as the church, especially in American life, to reach out, to support, to be engaged. And so let's hear their stories and then talk about how you might get involved in your community. Welcome Noel Yeatts and Jeremy Courtney. And you see the images, which I know for you, Jeremy, this is commonplace. You live in Iraq. You and your family have been there. You have children. I think part of the challenge that most of us have is this not feeling real enough. It feels like news headlines, images. We can't quite get our head around it. Will you just kind of tell us about why you live in the region, number one, which preceded any kind of refugee crisis we're talking about today, but then kind of bring us up to speed on what's been happening over this last decade in that region for you.
Yeah, I mean, like many of you, 9/11 was a really catalytic event in my life. It was one of those forks in the road when the whole church really seemed to retreat into itself and became very fearful of Muslims, fearful of terrorism, fearful of others. It seemed like a very xenophobic decade that we've been through. I don't know if we've ever quite come out of that moment since 9/11 when our temple was destroyed. And we were part of a tradition and part of a community that dared to preach a slightly different message, preach to us that just like the Father sent Jesus, so Jesus was sending us out in the world to die, out into the world to lay our lives down for others. And so we were compelled to go into the Middle East in a time of terrorism. We were compelled to move into Iraq in the middle of the Iraq War. And for many years, we've been now laboring in Iraq and laboring in neighboring countries like Iran and Libya, your favorite vacation spots. And we were there before ISIS came on the scene. We were there working in really hard places that you've heard about, like Fallujah, saving lives, serving people before ISIS came on the scene. And when ISIS kind of bubbled up from inside Iraq and started pouring over from Syria as well, we were already there. We already had a position in the country and already had been serving. And so we used that moment to really start reaching beyond the programs that we were already doing and to serve the people all around us. As 3.5 million refugees were pouring into our cities and people who had been persecuted and displaced by ISIS, we took on a new chapter of what we were doing and began giving out food and shelter and all those kinds of things that needed to happen at that time. But really what we've learned over the last couple of months is that this train of just continuing to give aid to people on a hamster wheel is not going to really be enough. And so we've also added a whole nother layer of what we're doing during these days, which is helping people get jobs and helping make sure that they can stand on their own 2 feet and have some form of economic development even in these hardest times.
Well, and Jeremy Courtney leads an organization called Preemptive Love that was doing life-saving heart surgeries prior to now. You do that and about 10 other things because you're responding. Noel Yeatts leads an organization called World Help. Her father founded Vernon Brewer, a wonderful organization that for years has been really working with the most vulnerable in so many contexts around the world. And you've been in the Middle East since 2004 doing work there. But tell us what's been unique about this particular refugee crisis in this moment.
Yeah. Well, we have been there since 2004, and we've been doing work like providing aid, planting churches. We partnered with the largest evangelical church in Iraq. We were able to provide 1 million Bibles there in the region, and even did things like sponsoring an internet cafe across the street from Baghdad University. So we were already there on the ground and had a network really that somewhat prepared us for this crisis. But you're right, this crisis was so unique, and I think if I had to narrow it down to just 2 things that make it so unique, is one, it's just the pure evil of the crisis. We've all heard it, the beheadings, the cutting children in half, the raping and the selling of women, the targeting of Christians and ethnic minorities. I mean, it's evil in some ways like we have never seen before. And then the second thing I would say is really the sheer magnitude of the problem. I mean, you have the U.S. recently declaring this genocide. We've all heard that it's the worst refugee crisis since World War II. I think the most recent numbers is 4 million refugees and 11 million displaced persons. I mean, it's huge. And so because it's so unique, this crisis required us to have a different strategy and a unique strategy. And so our strategy for this crisis is simple. It's rescue, restore, and rebuild. And we start with rescue because we start by saving their lives. And so we're sending container shipments of aid that is being delivered right to those camps: food, clothing, water, just basic living necessities. We have a mobile medical clinic that a church here in the States was able to fund that literally goes right to these refugee camps and provides health care that they don't have. And even if they had it, they couldn't afford. They set up in those camps for about 2 weeks, and hundreds of people line up every day that they're there. They can see about 100 patients a day. They're completely outfitted with doctors and equipment to treat everything from the common cold to high-risk pregnancies. And so that's just the beginning of our strategy. And as Jeremy said, we certainly can't stop there. But we have to start there because we can't really invest in them in any other way if we don't save their lives first.
Yeah, I know Sheikh Mohammed and Steve, we talked with them yesterday, but one of the things they had said to us in sort of a private meeting was those who feed them are the ones that they'll listen to, you know, and if you don't start with the basics, like forget about everything else. Jeremy, your wife, Jessica, has just been doing some really creative work that's pretty exciting. And I think part of what most people, we don't get in the media headlines, or at least sometimes in the Christian conversations about this, is people think it's the Christians are being persecuted. That's the only group that's really having an effect. But what you find is it's more Muslims than Christians who are dealing with what's happening. And that can sometimes be hard for Americans, for churches to figure out, how do we support working alongside Muslims? We saw Stephen Sheikh talking about that. I know you know Sheikh Mohammed, but some of your work, you have to work with those who don't agree with your theology necessarily, but do agree that we have to do something. Can you just talk about what Jessica's been doing and just how you kind of wrap your head around doing that?
Yeah, so this whole notion that we follow a God who dared to love his enemies gave birth to an idea that we've come to call preemptive love, that we lean forward to love other people, to strike other people with love before they do anything to us. We don't jump forward to hit other people before they do anything to us. We love other people before they do anything to us. And so this has led us into some of the hardest places of Iraq, into these communities where people have been beheaded and massacred by ISIS. And we've worked with militia leaders, and we've worked with grand ayatollahs, and we've worked with Sunni clerics, and we've worked across the board. And one of the things that has been born out of this situation is my wife's leadership on a project to help stand Iraqis and Syrians up on their own 2 feet so that they can make money for themselves. A regional product that's been in the region for decades and centuries before that is a handmade olive oil soap. And so she's seized upon this ancient practice and is teaching people who have been driven from their homes and are living in tents and living in, squalor and abandoned buildings, how to make this ancient product that the region loves, that the region needs. And teaching them to do it, they've formed these bonds. The women who have lost their husbands to ISIS, Syrians who have been driven out of their country because of Assad, and they have become this kind of sisterhood in the process. And so Jessica, my wife, has launched this international brand of soap, Sisterhood Soap. And it's just been a really exciting thing to watch not only my wife come to life in this process, but to watch these refugees who you would often rightly think of as not having many options and not having any money. They've come to life in this process. And the launch of this soap just a couple of days ago was so overwhelmingly positive that we've blown through our inventory 2 or 3 times already. We've had to rent new space. We've had to hire new refugees. Awesome. And we're putting thousands of dollars in the pockets of these women that wasn't there last week because of this idea of being in this together, actually being brothers and being sisters.
I love the creativity and the commitment to do something that's home to that region. And I know Jessica had to learn how to do this and then taught people that had never heard of this and knew how to do it to create these soaps. Really cool. Noel, there's a lot of fear in some American churches about refugees coming to the U.S. And we see that in a political season just get ramped up at a level that to most Christians, and all Christians, should be disgusting. How we think about how we should treat people who are the other, who are coming to us. That's a much longer discussion. But even when we asked our audience here, overwhelmingly, I think it was 97% said we should definitely be permitting refugees into the U.S. So strong support of that here. But one of the things, I think most people sitting here still go like, well, how do I help? What can I do? Tell us about how you guys as an organization have tried to handle that fear. You do a lot of communication to people in America who pastors who are trying to help their people understand to think bigger about this.
Right.
But then secondly, how can people get involved in this?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And, I think it's David Platt that said what the church needs is a God-centered view of the refugee crisis, because right now I feel like our politics are really trying to divide us when it's our compassion that should be uniting us. And I think especially in our current political climate, we're lost in the whole debate about the migrant crisis. And what we're forgetting, even though that's very important, what we're forgetting is that the overwhelming majority of these people, I think it's as high as 95%, are still living in the region and simply want to go home. We hear it over and over again. They just want to go home. So that's why World Help, partnering with Jeremy, we're focused on meeting the needs of the people there on the ground. And we're doing that in partnership with churches like the one has underwritten the medical clinic. And we're starting with that rescue. We go quickly into Restore. We're doing one-on-one trauma and grief counseling. We're giving Bibles to Christians who have lost everything. We're building community centers that can serve as churches and schools and places for these communities to safely gather that they don't have. One thing that I love that we're partnering with Jeremy on, the UN has called the children that are affected by this a lost generation, and the dreams of an entire generation are being shattered. And we have to do something about that. So we are partnering with Jeremy to send so many of these kids back to school. I think we've already, 20,000? And then just this week while we're here, we're talking about a new project, I believe focusing on Yazidi children, to send them back to school. We can give those children their dreams back.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well,
look, when we build this school together, we're not going to build it out of aluminum siding. It's going to be a great school because these kids deserve that kind of great environment in which to learn. It's not going to be some shoddy production.
Yeah.
And that's what it means to see the dignity, image of God in them.
Well, both of you, thank you for your work and your organizations and doing so much great work there, but then taking the time to help us get connected and get involved for those who this isn't the dominant thing that they're doing. Maybe it should become that. And you helped give us a window into how to do it. So let's thank them for joining us today. Thank you, guys.
Well, that conversation felt almost too short. We could have gone on for so many more minutes to just understand more of the dynamics happening there. But I hope it just gave you a little bit of a glimpse and enough encouragement to learn more. And part of how you can do that, with Jeremy Courtney's story, his organization, Preemptive Love, you can go to preemptivelove.org. You can also see sisterhoodsoap.com, where he describes the project his wife has created that's helping refugee women actually get back to work and start to be a part of providing for their families and also providing a great soap and a great product that people can enjoy. And also Noel Yeatts, part of World Help at worldhelp.net. These are just two organizations, but they represent so many others who are actually trying to lead well in this moment. And so I'd encourage you, if you're a church leader, if you're somebody just involved in a church, to figure out what is it that you are doing as a church? How are you going to engage this moment? Because as we discussed, this is one of those moments we will look back on in history, and our kids and our grandkids will say, what were you doing while that was happening? How were you involved? How were you engaged? We can't just stand by idly and suggest that this isn't our problem. This is our problem, and we have to respond. So I hope you'll do that. And if you want to learn more, come to qideas.org, where we actually have a 4-minute video that we worked with several organizations and a wonderful filmmaker to create that really helps educate really the average American, average Christian who's not spending a lot of time understanding maybe what's happening in the region to quickly grasp the significance of the moment and to consider how they might be involved, how they might engage. And so I'd encourage you to do that and join us again for our next episode, where we'll be having another talk that we'll listen to together and get to really see how leaders are engaging all kinds of different issues as significant as this to how they're thinking about their callings in a culture that we all get to be a part of, and we all get to be a part of helping see it flourish.